Hi, my name's Mickey Ferrugiaro and this is my video class to go along with my tutorial for the Flamenco needle case. This is a needle case made using the tube from tulip needles. It's a great way to utilize that cute little tube that they come in. I couldn't bear to throw mine away, so I had to do something fun with them. And this is great fun. I have had so much fun making these in all different colorways. I hope you do too. And so without further ado, we'll go get started. So here we are ready to start. I have my kit all laid out and I'm using A and C beads. And I have already strung my 30 beads, starting with a C bead, that's the white one, and then alternating with the black until I have a total of 30 beads. And then we're going to make this into a ring by going through the first bead, that's C bead. And now we can work our third row, and we're going to do that with black beads. So just peyote stitch, tubular peyote, working with the black beads. And we're leaving a 12-inch thread, a tail thread, so we can work some rounds and finish covering the tube with that thread. I like to leave my thread attached to the bobbin and then just trim it off later. Then I can figure out, how much I need. Always best to have more thread than less. Okay, so once we have worked this row, we're going to slide this onto the tulip tube that the beads come in, that the needles come in. These rounds, just 15 beads, actually go quite quickly. Almost there. And our last bead and stepping up. Okay, so this is what we're looking at. And now we're going to slide this on, keeping our working thread up and our tail thread down, and just sliding those onto the tube. Give it a nice little pull so it's tighter. It should be, well, it could be loose or tighter. It'll get tighter as we're working. And we want it to be able to slide a little bit because we're going to slide it back down there. There's a little line, if you can see this, around where the straight part goes into the dome. And that's where we want our beads to be sitting. But if we work them there, they're going to fall off all the time. So slide it down until we've a few rows. Okay, so now you're going to work a total of 21 rows. So this is the first 3 of those 21. And you're just going to alternate working in a white row and a black row so that we get the stripes going up. So the next row is going to be in white and then black, white, black. Okay, so work that until you have 21 rows and we will be back. So here we are with the 21 rows, and row 22 and row 23 are worked in our B beads. So for this one it's the yellow, and we're going to work 2 rows. We'll step up after the first row, but we will not step up after the second row because we're going to add a surface bead. So work this row and the next one in the yellow beads, but don't step up after the second row of yellow, which is row 23. So here it is after row 23, and we haven't stepped up, so I'm coming out of this bead. And we're just going to work a second row 23 using D beads. That's the size 11 seed bead. And we're just going to work into row 22 so that the beads stand on top of the beadwork. If you can see this here, get a good angle on that. You see how they sit on top. This is part of what we're going to anchor our flamenco panels to. So once you've worked this row around, you want to step back down into this row, and then we'll start the little flower pattern. So you're stepping down back into this row, and then we'll start the flower pattern. After stepping back up into the original row 23, work 2 rows, rows 24 and rows 25, in the bee beads. And then we're ready to start our patterning. And so we're going to start this, and it's going to be 2 of our bee beads, and then 1 of our A beads. And that's the pattern all the way around. So we'll be repeating this 5 times. Nice simple little flower. If you don't want it to be a flower, you want it to be a spot, just don't put the center bead in white. We're going to put a center bead in white here, but if you just want it to be a plain spot, then just keep it black. So for row 27, we're going to start with a bee bead, and then we're going to put a black on each side of the black. So this pattern is 1 B, 2 A's. 1 B and 2 A's. Okay, and for our next row, we're going to work start with one of our bee beads, and then we're going to put a white center in. This is where I say, if you want the flowers, put the white centers in. If you don't, put black centers in for spots. So flowers or spots. And then another of our yellow. So your pattern here is yellow, white, yellow. Oops, that's not a yellow. And our last bead for our step up. Okay, and the next row we're starting with our blacks, because we're going to put black on top of black, and then a yellow on top of a yellow. You can see that little flower forming. The last bead is a yellow with our step up. And this row we're just going to finish off our flowers, so we're putting our last black bead on top to complete our little flower, and then 2 beads in our yellow. And you work that all the way around. And then we're going to work a couple of rows in just a plain yellow. So you can go ahead and work those, and we'll come back and do a white flower. Okay, so work this row, 2 plain rows in the yellow. So here we are at row 33, and we're ready to do another flower, and we're reversing the colors on this one. So we're going to start with a white, so it'll be a white flower with a black center. So it's just the same. We start with a white and then 2 yellows and a white. Oh, make sure you don't get your threads wrapped around beads. If you're a speedy beader, it happens more, I think. Sometimes I work too fast for myself. Okay. This is our last repeat here. And our step up. Okay, so now we're going to add a white at the side of the white, and then 1 yellow, and then the white at the side of the white. And then we start that all over again. Our white, yellow, white, white, yellow, white, white, yellow, white, and our last repeat, white, yellow, white, and our step up. Okay, the next row we're going to start with 2 yellows, 1 and 2, and then we're going to put our black centers into our white flowers. Our 2 yellows. Okay, so we can see how this is coming about. And basically, you're just going to finish this the same way that you did your black one. You can see the placement. You've got 2 plain rows after you finish a flower, and then you start the flower so it's in the center of the 2 previous flowers. So once you finish this flower, 2 plain rows, and you'll do a black flower, and then 2 rows, do a white flower, 2 rows, and do a black flower. And I'll meet you back after you've done your plain rows after your last black flower. Okay, we'll be up towards the top of the tube at that point. So I'll meet you back here. Okay, so here we are with all of our flowers in, and I've worked the 4 rows, the 4 plain rows at the end of the flowers. So when you finish your flower, there's 4 rows of the plain. We've worked those, but I did not step up after the last row. And that's because we're going to do another top row. So again, using the D beads, I'm working into the next, not the last row, but the one before that. You're just going to work the 15 beads around. This is just for decoration. It's not, we're not going to use these to attach anything, but it kind of creates a nice balance and a little bit of detail around the neck. Okay. And once we have our beads in, we're going to step up to that original row from where we left off. Okay, so that's what you're looking at, the standing off the beadwork. So that was our second row 62. So now we're going to work rows 63 and 64, and we're going to do those in A beads, so we have a little band of black around the neck. So just regular tubular peyote, 2 rows of black. And then we're going to work 2 rows using the yellow E beads. So these are our little 15s. So work the 2 rows in black and then work 2 rows in the 15s, and we'll come back and look at it, okay? So here we are after having done the 2 rows of 15s on the top. And it's just where it closes in a little bit, where the tube kind of turns in. It gets a little bit narrower at the neck. You can just see it. It just turns in that little bit there. Okay, so that's why we're using 15s there. Okay, so you can weave this thread in now, and the next section that we're going to be working on is the base. We're going to enclose the tube and then create a standing base for it. Okay, so weave this thread in and I'll meet you back to do the base. So I've used the tail thread to work 2 rows in the B beads into row 1. So this is the base row 1, base row 2. I didn't step up after row 2, and I'm here working our top beads. So I'm just putting the last ones of those in. I did this because it's pretty straightforward, and watching peyote is like watching paint dry. So here we go. And so now we're going to step back down into base row 2. This is our second base row 2 that sits on top. Okay, so now we're back to the original one, and we can start to close this up over the tubing. Okay, you probably, when you put the second row in, you probably saw it stood off a bit. Now you can understand when you put that second row in, it closes those beads around the tube. And so we can move down to a size 15 bead. And we're going to work 2 rows in the 15s. So that's the E bead, and just 2 rows that will start to close it up even more over this tube. Okay, so when you work these 2 rows, and we will come back for some decreasing. Okay, so with those 2 rows of 15s in, you can see how nicely it starts to curve over this dome of the tube. The next row we're going to decrease, and this row we're actually going to work into to extend our base, to make our flat base. So we're going to put these beads in a different color, and I'm going to use the C bead. This just makes it easier to see. And we're going to do 2 beads, and then we're going to skip the next stitch. So I'm going through the next 2 little 15s. And then we're going to work 2 more stitches. And if you can't get through both of them, don't worry, just skip it on the next stitch. Whichever way works easier for you. Another 2. So we're taking this down from 15 beads down to 10 beads with our skip stitches. Okay, and then we're stepping up. So that's what we're looking at. You see like a little pentagon forming. Okay, and next row we're going to go back down to our 15s. And we're going to work 1 per stitch, so we'll have 10 beads in there, 10 stitches. So there are our 10 stitches, and we're stepping up on the last one. You can see that's pulling in nicely around there. And then we're going to work 1 more row in the 15s, 1 bead per stitch. Okay, for this next row we're going to decrease some more, and we're going to decrease in that first stitch. If you look where your those C beads are, where they're standing straight, not where they're decreased, we want to be putting one that sits in between those, an 11 delica. So we're going to have to skip this first bead right here. So skip the first stitch, then add one of the C beads, and we're going to skip the next stitch. Add a B bead, adding B beads here, and skipping the next stitch. So that's all it is going. You see, you could just add your C bead and then skip the next stitch, going through the next 2 15s. And now last one, and we're down to just 5 beads at this point. Okay, so once you've got those 5 beads in, then we're going to work 5 of our 15s for our final row. Just to close it all up here. Okay, and then on the last row you want to just step, as you step up through that one, through your first bead of the last row, and then just go through all those little 15 beads, your little E beads. Go through them all just so that you can cinch them up really nice and tight, so it really closes the top up. Okay. Get a push so it all nice and tight. And there you go, that's the finish of the the base. Now, and once you've tightened those beads up, we're going to step down. So you're going to step down through the 11, the B bead, the delicate 11, and then through the pair of 15s, the next 15, and then the white delicate. Okay, and that puts you in the correct place for building the base so that this will actually stand up, because it's not going to stand up right now. We need to create a nice flat base here. Okay, so this is row B9, and we're working in B beads. And in the first stitch, we're going to put 2, because we've got the 10 of our C beads right here. We need to get this number back up to 15. So where we decreased, that's where we're going to increase. So we put 2 in there, and then 1, and then 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and our last 1. And when you step up, you're only going to step up through the first bead of that first pair. Okay, so row B10. And we're coming out of the first one of the pair, the first pair that we put in. And between the pairs, we're going to add a little 15 bead. And then we're going to work 2 B beads. That's the delicate. And then the little 15 in between. And the reason that we're doing this is because if I had to put a delicate in here, it tends to sit out quite far, and it makes a definite pentagon, whereas we want to get back to having a circle. So this bead will just help that happen. Okay, so 2 delicates. There's our 15. Two more delicates. A little 15 between our pairs. And step up. Okay, so it's beginning to look round. If you look, we haven't got a distinct pentagon, which we would have had if we'd have put delicates in there. So, our next row, we can work in all delicates. And that should give us a nice round base again. Okay, so there we have row B11, and you can see it's lifted up above. You can see it's like pulling up, and that's what we need so that we can get that straight base. So now you can put your needle straight across and you've got a flat base on there. So row B12, nice and easy, we're going to just work it in our D beads. That's the size 11 seed bead. Don't put too tight a tension on this because we are going to be increasing in and we want to keep it flat. So, if you pull too tight, it's going to curl up like this. You don't want that. You want to keep it a nice looser tension on it because we are going to be increasing. And it's much easier to increase into a looser tension than a tighter tension. We don't want broken beads. So you can see the trick of just putting your thumb down so it's not too tight. I'm going to step up and just keep that thumb down so that you're not too tight on there. We want that to be a nice flat base. So just keep it loose enough so that when we add the next row, we're going to do that. I'm going to need more thread, so I'm going to add some new thread and we'll be back to work on adding 2 beads in between. Okay, I am back with more thread added. The reason I told you to leave a 12-inch thread and I didn't listen to my own instructions here is because the 12 inches should just get you to finish covering the tube, which means it's nice and easy to work in an extra thread at that point than it is at this point, because tension is, you know, an issue here, and sometimes adding your thread can tighten things up where you don't want it. So I was letting you guys have it easy and I made it difficult for myself. Oh well, that's the job of a designer, right? Okay, so row B13. We're going to add 2 of our 15s in between our last row of beads, which were the size 11s. If you are choosing your own colours for this design, one of the things that you've got to watch for is that the colours all arrive in, you know, that they make them in the same colour, because getting colours to match is the tricky thing. Mayuki does some seed beads that match. Like on this one, this is 2103 in a Delica, and they do the colour that matches it in a 15 and an 11. Some of the colours we've had trouble getting because they just don't make them in those, you know, in all the sizes. So if you're making your own colorway, that's the thing to watch for. Your main colour needs to be available in a Delica, a size 15 and a size 11 seed bead. A little bit floppy here. Don't worry, because we're going to attach it and that'll tighten everything up. Okay, again, putting your thumb on top really helps with tension. Okay, so now we're kind of at the turn bead. And when I say that, this is the next bead that we're going to add is what we're going to attach the bottom of our flamenco panel to. So this is why we're using a size 11 seed bead. And I say it's also a turn bead because we're going to start working decreasing after this. We're going to work back up because we're going to attach this, to these beads here. The base is going to attach, so you can see we are standing up now. Okay, so we have our base. That was what we really needed to achieve. We've got that, so now we just need to make it more secure. We have row B14 in, and as you can see we now have a base that makes a tube stand up So that's what we're looking for. We just need to firm this up now, and we're going to firm this up by attaching it to these beads. So we're going to build it in a little bit so that we can attach it in here and so that it becomes a nice firm base. So here we're adding 2 delicas per stitch for this row. And it's going to curve up a little bit, that's fine. We're actually going to make it curve the other way once we start to put the next row in. So don't worry if it's curving up. Okay, so finish this row and we'll come back for the next one where we'll be making it curve in the opposite direction. Okay, so here we are with it. All the double delicas in, our delica pairs are all in, and I'm going to do one thing here because it's easier for me to work in that direction. I'm going to change direction, so instead of coming out this way, I want to be going the other way. So I'm just going to weave through there and then weave through here so that I'm in the same kind of position, only I'm going in the direction that I'm comfortable going in. It's easier for me to show you on camera too. Okay, so now I've kind of turned it so that I'm looking at it the other way, which really helps. And we're just going to add 1 delica per stitch going through our pairs. So we want that delica to sit on top, and as we pull that in, you'll see it'll start to sit on top. So that's what we're working on for this row. Make sure it sits on top and pushes that seed bead out. See, there you go. See how it's pushing those out now? That's what we want. So here we are with that all finished now, that B16, row B16 finished. And you see it's much nicer, firmer base already. The next row, we're going to go back to our 15s. I'm going to put 2 15s between each 11 delica. So that is row 17, B17 finished. You can see there's a really nice firm base now. No more floppiness. Okay, so the last row that we're doing here, we're going to add one of our B beads, our 11 delicas, right between our 15s, our pairs of 15s. So we're going to work this and then we're going to zip it up. And that will complete the base. So here we finished row 18 and now we're going to zip this up to our 11 seed beads. Just as you'd zip anything else up. Through the 11, the delica and the 11 seed bead. So the B bead and the D bead. Those B beads will tend to fall inside. But once we get them, we catch them and get them anchored in. And there we are. So we now have our base complete and our tube stands up really well. So you might just need to make sure that all those beads sit out. Make sure all of your 11s, your D beads, are all sitting out, because those are ones that we're going to work on our panels. Our panels are going to connect this bead to this bead, and we're going to do that next. So finish this thread, and then we're going to work a thread in securely so that it exits one of these beads. Okay, so weave it in here and exit it here, and I'll join you back for that. Flamenco panels next. So here we are, ready to start our flamenco panels. I've woven a thread into these beads and I've made it so it exits out of one of the 11 beads. It doesn't matter which one, but you want to do it there. So it's like as you're weaving through, if you weave through this bead and then make a turn to come through this bead, that works really well. I'll show you further as we add more thread in. I'll show you just how to do that. Okay, so from here we're going to string 24 of our E beads. This will be rows 1 and 2 of the panel, and we're going to attach it not directly below. So if we trace this down, we see this bead and we want to go to this one, but we're not going to use that one. That's our 1 bead. We're going to count 2 and 3. We're going to go through the third one. So we have an angle. Okay, and we're going to work the next row in 15s, and you're going to come through that first 15 so that we anchor that in, and then we're going to work this row just in 15s. Now again, always the first row, row 3 is a little tricky, working into those strung beads. And it is tricky on this one, particularly the more beads we get, but there's more panels that we've made. But we are, there is a way to this, and it's like, get it over your nail, over the nail, not under the nail. And then you can just see to pull this. Give it a nice tug each time. And it doesn't matter if it twists, because it's going to twist anyway once we get working. That's kind of part of the design. So that at least makes it easier. But you can see once you get into that, point of being able to work it, then it gets easier. A little tricky sometimes, just getting these beads in for this first row. Then as you add your last bead, you're going to go through that 11 again, that first bead that we're connecting to. Just be sure to just pop him up. Just get this thread out of the way so I don't confuse you on threads. You just get that baby up there. Okay, so you can see you're getting a nice curve happening on that already. Okay. So that is row 3, and for row 4 we're going to come back through that last bead again. This will lock it in place, and for this row we're going to work in the 11s in B beads, the delicas, and this row much easier. Bit of wobbly camera there. These panels are a lot of fun to do. Once you get past this little first row, and even that, you've got 15 to do, so by the time you've finished, you've got the practice in. And as you add your last 11, your last delica, you're going to go through that bottom 11 seed bead, and then you're going to come back up that 11, up the delica. So you can see we've got a nice growth spurt coming on here. It's widening out. And we're going to work another row in the delicas. And you may see that it begins to do this, which is exactly what we want. That's our little flamenco flip. The beads do the work on this one. On the last stitch of this, add a 15. So rather than adding 11 in that last stitch, you're going to add a 15. Let's just give it a little bit straighter edge at the top. Okay, and then come back through that 15. Okay. And then you're going to start the next row, which is row 6, with a 15. And then you're going to start in your 11 seed beads. Oop. And this panel is the main color panel, so it's all done in the same color. And the following panels will change colors. We'll have a black panel, or a panel that's yellow and black, and one that's yellow and white. So you'll work. And I apologize for my scratchy voice. It's the air is really bad here, and I'm quite affected by it. My eyes were bad yesterday. Today it's my throat. Okay, so at the end of this row, you're going to go through both of those delicas and then turn again through the 11 through our anchoring bead. Then you're going to go back up and you're going to go through the 2 delicas and the 11 seed bead. You usually have to make 2 passes to do that. Okay. And here we are now for our last row, and this is our embellishment bead. And on this yellow one, I'm using a little 2mm pearl, just because it was what I could get that was a color that would work. Basically anything 2mm will work in here. And you see this really does pull us our twist going on. Just to be able to get the beads in, it's got to stretch that out. So that's what creates the nice flow of those flamenco panels. Oh, we're chasing these all over the place here. And then as you add your last one, which is hiding from me, oh, as you add the last of these embellishment beads, you're going to go through those 2 15s. You might need to do a finer needle if you've not got a big hole in your little 15s. But we're managing here. Okay, and you can just shape this, you know, feel free to just give it the nice little flamenco feel to it, just twisting it around. You'll get to play with them all at the end, just to make them all sit where you want them to sit. But you can see it gives a really nice twist on there. Okay, so we're going to go through that 11 again to finish. And I like to anchor it, so that delica that's just sitting above it, gently go through there. You might need to change your needle down if you're using a thick needle, so you don't break that bead. And then we can weave, turn again, and just weave through so that we can get to our next 11 bead. Okay, so here we are. We've added our 24 beads for our next panel, and I'm going through the next 11 bead on the base, and then through that first one to lock it in, and then we've got that terrible row 3. Here we go. And I think it gets easier when you've put a few beads in. Just keeping attention on it helps. So all the panels are basically made the same, it's just a matter of changing the colour. And it's just the colour of your delica and the embellishment bead that you're going to change. So it's not drastic changes. You can see how it turns, like just keeping your nail under there really helps. We're almost there. And when you get to the top, you're just going to go back through your 11 bead and then of course turn and anchor that. Okay, so the next row we're going to use A beads, So just the same as we were doing. Just fish for your beads sometimes if they're turning around from you. As we add that last one for this row, we're going through the 11 and then back up the delica. Turn, and then we're going to work another row in our delicas. They're nice and easy to work once you get that row 3 in. A lot of fun to work, actually. I've made more of these, I think, than anything that I've ever made samples of. It's a quick project to do and just really fun. And not forgetting, when you get to the top, you're just going to work one of our little E-beads for that last stitch. And you're going to go back through that E-bead so that it locks the row and turns. And then you're going to start with an E-bead before going into your D-beads. And as you add your last bead, you're going to go through both of those delicas, through the anchor bead on the bottom, then back up through the delicas, and it's going to let me go through the 11 as well. And now we just need to put the embellishment bead on. And the embellishment bead for these panels, I'm using a true 2mm fire polish. Give it a little sparkle. And of course in black to match the delica. Ooh. There are so many options on this. I give the option of putting drops in as well. I aren't doing it on this particular one, but with the drops you've got to watch the stem of the drop, because using a 3.4 the stems of the drops can vary quite a lot. Some of them can be wide enough to just put in on their own, and others, if they've got a thin stem, you need to add one of your 15s as well, so that we get the stretch on the beads that gives this nice curve. So it's another option. The 2mm, probably the 2.5 Swarovski if you wanted to use that. A little bicone would work in here. But those 2mm pearls and the 2mm true cuts look really fun. Okay, so there we go, back again, and again we're going to anchor it into the delica below very carefully because we don't want to break that delica. If you feel like you're really having to force it, then change your needle size down one. Okay, now we're going to turn and go through here, and then through this delica, and we can step back into our anchor bead. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing here, and all I'm going to do is where I've got white, where I've got black, I'm going to put white. So I'm going to work on this next one, and I'll show you when I come back. And it's pretty much simple from there. You're just going to repeat this. You're going to have 5 of each color all the way around. Okay, so here we are with the white one in. So that's our 3 panels. You see how fun that is? And so now we're going to continue working all the way around. So it'll be yellow, black, white, all the way around. And when we get back down to here, I'll come and show you, working the last couple, because it's, just putting them in because you don't have as much space. As you see, just really nice and fun to do. And they work fast, so, definitely a quick project, which makes a change for me. Okay, so I'll work some more, and I'll come back and show you weaving a new thread in when I need one, and we'll see it in progress. Okay, so you can see we've got quite a few of the skirts on now, but I still need to work these, and I need extra thread. So I'm going to leave it so I can do a long workable tail thread. So I'm going to go into this bead. That's where I want my tail thread coming out of, so it'll be ready to work. And then I'm just going to go up through this delica right above the bead. And then I'm going to work this thread back. So I've come out of this bead, now I'm going to turn and come through this one. And I'm just weaving through the beads over to where I want to be. And I'm just going to put one turn in it so that it'll just latch it a bit. So this way I'm turning around again and then turning back. Up through this one, and this one, and I'm turning again here so I can just go straight through my bead. My thread's nice and secure in now, and so I've got a tail thread there that I can use when I run out of thread again. Okay, so I'm going to continue adding in my panels, and I'll come back and do the last panel because it's with a little bit of squishing around to get that last panel in. Okay, so I will meet you back for the last panel. So here we are, we're almost done. We've got one panel left to put in, and it's tight, so I figured I'd show you just, the method of working this. Just like we've done before, you should be really good at this by now. You just want to ease your panels aside so that you can get in there. Once you've got this first row done, the difficult first row, then it's not so bad. But you can see you can actually get in there and do this. It's harder to get your nail underneath, but if you just push against the beads, it really helps. And if your thread does that, doesn't matter, you can tighten that up. If it loosens it out, just tighten it up and pull up your beads. That kind of motion will tighten everything up. I'm pulling back on the thread so that I can keep this tight while I find my next bead to go through. Like I say, it's a little tricky on this one just because we don't have a lot of space to put our thumb. But just take it one bead at a time and you'll be fine. There is some flexibility in the panels, so don't worry if you're knocking them out, because we can straighten those up afterwards as well. So again, keeping that thread taut helps a lot. Check, make sure every bead goes in correctly. It's easy to skip a bead on this where you don't need to. Okay, and at this section, we're pretty easy to work at this point. We're kind of out of the depths. Back up through my little 15 there to lock it in. Nice tight. And then we can move on to our final colour, which in this case for me is the white. So it's pretty easy from here, just like you've done before. I just wanted to show you just putting that one in, because sometimes it looks like you can't get it in. But you just have to pry your little panels apart that bit so you can see what you're doing. Okay, so now it's pretty easy to work from there. Okay, and so that's your final panel. Okay, here I'm going to give you a couple of troubleshooting tips. One is that when you're finishing your row, and instead of going through this way through your bead and then locking into this bead, this delica that's buried down, sometimes that can be a bit tricky. So what you can do is actually come through the bead this way and just skip that going backwards bit and go up through this bead right here. This is the one that you would end up turning on. Okay, and if you give it a nice tug, it pulls in and your thread pretty much disappears. So, you know, again, make sure that your thread works well with the colour beads that you're using, but it does pretty much disappear. You can see, you can't really see that thread in there. And it'll, when you go back down through this bead, you'll pull this tight and it'll do the same thing. The thread will just disappear into the groove of the beads. Okay, That makes life a little bit easier on that turn. So the second troubleshooting tip I'm going to give you is for if you've had, like me, working on this colorway. I think with the metallics having a thicker coating, this has made everything a bit tighter. So my room to put in my last panel is very tight, and then not a lot of flexibility in the panels. So I came up with a way to add this last panel, or the last two panels, if you're having a problem. So I have strung my 24 E-beads, the little 15s, and we're going to work rows 3 and 4 without attaching. So we're going to skip this first bead, the first 2 beads. So we're going to have this bead sit here so that the second bead becomes our first double delicate stitch, double peyote stitch. Okay, so it's going to look like this. This bead is going to sit, that's the 24th bead of the stringing, it's going to sit like that, and that's fine. And so then we're just going to work the peyote stitch on this free hanging strand. It's still a pain in the butt to do row 3, particularly in small beads, but this at least lets you see where you're going. Turn it around this way so I can hold this against the tube now. It gives me a bit more ability to work, though not so good for seeing everything. Bronze against bronze tends to disappear. It's still that tricky third row. Yeah, a little tricky getting in there. There we go. And then we've got our last bead. If we lay this back down, so it looks as if it's back to where we should be, and the last bead going through the 11. And then we just do our normal turn. And now we're going to do the next row, which is in our delicas. This time it's our turquoise delicas. And sometimes just getting a hold of it is, once you get it set, then it seems to work. Just getting the position that's comfortable. And still keeping tension on your thread helps you get into the beads. So we're just working down. Turn our beads over so we get that curve going on. And okay, so this is where you're at. You've got this dangling bead hanging. So we're going to go through this one. So go through that end bead, and then we're going to slide this in between. We can work that through the panels, and then we can attach it into that 11 bead down at the bottom. So coming out of the 11, you're going to go back through that 15, and we're going to do a turn because we're still short one delica that we're going to need to put on here. Okay, so we're going to go up here through the 15, pull it tight in again, and turn through, not through the delica, through the 15. So you see where I'm turning in those 15s? I'm coming up through that end one, going through one to the side, and then the one next to it, and then coming back down. That's so I can add my last delica on this row and go through the 11 on the bottom. Then I can turn and go up through the delica. So now we're back to just as we work as normally on row 5. Okay, so it's just working up in the delicas again, and you can see now working the delicas isn't too bad. You can kind of see where you're going. It's a bigger hole to work with. You're not trying to work that horrible third row in the ditch. So it's nice and easy to do. Can just ease it about that little bit so we can see what we're doing. There we go. So if you do have trouble getting in there, and it could be, you know, 1 or 2 panels at the end, then this is the way around it so that you can get in there. Looks like we have gone through our thread there. There we go. Okay, so finish your last panel, and then we'll come back and we'll be back working on the yellow again and do the lid. So now you have the bottle finished, and you can straighten these panels just by pulling them out at a right angle to your work, into the center, so that they stand out. Just like that, so they've got that nice form going on, and you can lay them that way all the way around. Just play with them till you're happy with them. Okay, and also press this down. Take the bottle and put it on a firm surface and press down, and that will flatten out all your beads for the base so that it doesn't wobble. Just giving it a good press on a hard surface will make it stand all the better. Okay, so now we put this aside and we make our top. Okay, so for the lid, I have strung 30 bee beads, and I join them into a circle by going through the first bead again, and then I've worked my row of bee beads, my first row. So now that's row 3, so now I'm going to put my cork in, and it just goes in nicely. These beads should sit close to the top. We're going to anchor it down by putting 15s, 2 rows of 15s down here with using our tail thread. And you want to leave, 6 to 12 inches on the tail thread. So here we can just pull these tight around the cork, and we're going to work one more row in our delicas, our bee beads. And these should just sit up a little bit over the cork. A nice tug on it. You can see I had a little bit of the cork break off here, but I'm not going to worry about it because our beading is going to completely cover all that up. And our last bead of the row and our step up. Okay, at this point I'm going to unthread my needle and I'm going to thread in my tail thread, and I'm going to work the 2 rows using E-beads, the little 15s, to tighten this all up so that we don't have to worry about it slipping. Okay, so I'm going to work 2 tail thread, 2 rows in E-beads, and we'll come back after that. This is what it looks like when you've got those 2 rows in. You can see it's getting a nice little shape going on there. And you can see that the 11s, the delicas, are sitting up on the top. So now we're back with our working thread, and we're going to work 2 rows in our 15s so that we can start the decrease for this circle. So it's nice and easy, just 2 rows in 15s. Step up at the end of each row and we'll be back for the decrease. Here we are after row 6, and row 7 is also worked in 15s, but we're going to do a decrease. So we're going to work 2 15s and then we're going to skip a stitch, so we're going to go through the next 2 15s. So 2 stitches, 1, 2, and skip. One, 2, and skip. 1, 2, and skip. 1, 2, skip, and step up. So we have like a little star on top now, little pentagon. Okay, row 8. Row 8, we're going to start with a skip stitch. So we're going to skip through the little 15, and then where we had the previous skip stitch, we're going to add a delica, and then we're going to go through those 2 little 15s for our skip stitch, add a delica, skip through those 2 15s, add a delica, skip through, yep, fly it away, delica and skip through, delica and skip through and step up. Okay, so now we have our little black delicas, and this is where we're going to attach our bead. So you can see it just fits into this little space here. If there's anything tricky about this design, this is it. And it's basically, so we've got to go up and down this bead numerous times. So what you want to do is, as you're coming out of your delica, you're going to go up the bead. And we're not going to put a really tight tension on this because we've got to bend this bead backwards and forwards so that we can get our needle through. So we're going to add one of our little G beads, our little black fire polished in this case, and then we're going to come back down. And again, like I say, not too tight. And then the delica that we came out of, we're going to go back through. And as we've come through the delica, we're going to skip through those 2 15s, the E beads, and up through the next delica. Then we're going to go back up our topper bead, through our little fire polish on top, and back down again. And we want to go back through the bead where we've got the thread coming out. That was our second bead. And pull that in. Again, we're not putting a huge tension on this because it should be nice and floppy. By the time we get it all the way around, it will hold up a certain amount. But it's what we're going to do after that that's going to really hold that bead straight. So don't worry about it being floppy right now. Skip through your 2/15s. Step up into the next delica, and again up through your topper bead. Drew the fire polish on top, and back down. And we go back through that delica. So you have 2 threads. If you can see that, you've got 2 threads on each delica, coming in and coming out. Step through the 2/15s and through the next delica. Back up our topper bead and through our little fire polish. Back down. So you've got to be able to bend that bead. If you put that in too tight, you won't be able to do it. And we're going to wrap around back to our bead that we just came out of, and through we go, and through our 2/15s, and step up through our final delica. See, we're getting it so it's straight, a little bit harder to get your needle in this time. Through our 15, we can make one more pass. If it gets tight like this, change down to a smaller needle. Okay, so I've stepped down to a smaller needle, and you see the smaller needle goes through fine. There is a tulip needle that's a size 13. It's very expensive. I think it's like over $10 for 2 needles. But the size 13 will get you out of pretty much any issue you have with your beads being, not having enough room. Okay, so I've got to search around here to make sure I get the right bead. It's this one that looks cockeyed. And as I go through there, we pull up. So you can see we have it standing up, but a bit floppy. And we're going to fix that. So, coming out of the delica, we're going to add 2/15s. 2 of our E-beads. I'm going to start a little building up around here. Going into the delicas. 2/15s in each stitch. And step up through the 2/15s. You can see we're getting more of a sturdy topper right now. And then we're going to add a row of the black delicas, just 1 bead per stitch, treating those 15s as 1 bead, that pair as 1. Keep a nice tension on it. how we want the tension. Step up. Okay, so you see we're getting firmer each row. The next row we're going to work with 2 delicas per stitch. That's our B bead. And step up through that first pair. Next row, again with our black delica, our A bead, just 1 bead per stitch. And step up. You can see this is really getting quite firm now. But we're not done. I'm getting short on thread though. Okay, so we're going to do another row with our delicas, our B beads, 2 beads per stitch. And step up through the first pair. We're going to add 1 more row of our A beads, 1 bead per stitch. Step up. Final row, we're going to add our little fire polish, and we're going to put a 15 on each side, so a little yellow 15 on each side, and then go through your A bead. 15, G bead 15. And there we go. You see it's really nice and firm now. There's no worries about it. And the thing that I recommend that you do at this point is go around everything again. So that if your tension's a bit loose, this is the time to tighten it all up so that that bead does stay nice and firm. And you can do this. So go backwards through that bead so that you're locking things as you go. Because you're also weaving your thread in, so it's a good way to weave the thread, lock everything in place, and keep it nice and tight so that our topper bead stands up straight. And I like to work all these rounds of this stand-up section. I like to rework all of them so that it's really nice and secure. So that's what I'm going to be finishing doing. And here's a little tip, a little trick I've got. And that is by taking a straight pin, like a little quilting pin, And if you go through this, find the center of your cork, and then holding your needle straight so that your topper, if you push it gently through the cork, keeping it straight, it should go up your bead. I've angled that a bit again. Oh, missed the hole. Nearly there. There we go. And you can just put that in. It really doesn't, you know, take anything off the design, but it just gives it another extra stabilization. So it's a little trick. You can put that on before you do, you know, before you start working these rows if you like, if it's too floppy for you to work with. But that's basically where you're at. So there, woo. So there we have flamenco. So there you go. You have flamenco. I hope you had as much fun making this as I did. I kind of got a little bit carried away in making them. And I have accumulated many colorways and still more to come. So it is a little addictive, is this one. I hope you enjoyed as much as I have, and hopefully you'll also look at some of my other tutorials with video classes. This is Mickey Ferrugiero saying thanks. Hope to see you again.